Imagine you're a sheriff in 1872 and someone walks into your town carrying a weapon that fires 30 rounds without reloading. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is realizing that this is just one of dozens of experimental weapons floating around the frontier, and you have no idea what you're up against. Forensic analysis of 1870s crime scenes reveals evidence of weapons that shouldn't have existed. Explosive bullet impacts, multiple simultaneous wounds, and ballistic patterns that modern experts initially couldn't explain. These weren't isolated incidents. They were systematic tests of experimental warfare technology. Today, we're diving into the real underground arsenals of the Wild West. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at frontier history the same way again. Let's kick things off with a weapon that literally puts the power of a cavalry charge in your back pocket. The Confederate superweapon. Imagine pulling out what looks like a regular revolver, only to realize it's got a freaking shotgun barrel underneath it. So we're in 1856, right in the middle of all that pre-Civil War tension. Down in New Orleans, this French-American doctor named Jean-Alexandre Lamat is sitting in his workshop thinking, you know what? 9 bullets just isn't enough. What if we added a shotgun to this thing? The guy was literally trying to reinvent the wheel of frontier violence. See, the Mexican-American War had just ended, and everyone could see that a bigger conflict was brewing. Military officers wanted weapons that could give them every possible advantage when the shooting started. Lamat figured that if you're going to carry a sidearm, why not make it do double duty? The South was already feeling outnumbered and outgunned, so they needed every technological edge they could get. The Lamat revolver was absolutely insane for its time. You've got your standard 9-shot cylinder, already more firepower than most revolvers could offer. But here's the kicker. There's a .42 caliber 20-gauge shotgun barrel mounted right underneath the main .42 caliber rifle barrel. 2 triggers, 2 completely different ways to ruin someone's day. The top trigger fired the revolver rounds, perfect for picking off targets at distance. But when enemies got close, and I mean uncomfortably close, you could flip a little nose-mounted lever, switch to the bottom trigger, and deliver a devastating shotgun blast that could clear an entire hallway. Confederate generals like Pierre Beauregard and J.E.B. Stuart carried these things because honestly, when you're outnumbered on every battlefield, you need every advantage you can get. The psychological impact was incredible too. Imagine being in a gunfight and watching your opponent switch from precision shooting to room clearing mode without even changing weapons. When the Confederacy collapsed in 1865, most Lamats got melted down for scrap metal or buried alongside their owners' other Confederate memorabilia. The Union Army systematically destroyed captured weapons to prevent them from falling into the hands of guerrilla fighters during Reconstruction. But if 10 rounds of mayhem sounds crazy, wait until you hear about the gun that tried to put 30 shots in your pocket. The lever action monster. What if I told you there was a pistol in the 1850s that could fire 30 rounds without reloading, and it actually worked? This is 1848, and this brilliant inventor named Walter Hunt is sitting in his New York workshop, probably drinking too much coffee and obsessing over newspaper reports from the Mexican-American War. American soldiers are dying because they have to reload their single-shot muskets after every shot, leaving them vulnerable to Mexican cavalry charges. Hunt's watching his country struggle with outdated military technology, and he's like, what if we just didn't have to reload at all? The timing was perfect for innovation. The California gold rush was about to explode, creating demand for reliable firearms among prospectors and settlers heading into dangerous territory. Meanwhile, the Industrial Revolution was providing new manufacturing techniques that made complex mechanical systems actually feasible for the first time in history. The Volcanic repeating pistol was basically magic for its time period. Picture this, 30 rounds stored in a tubular magazine underneath the barrel, a lever action feeding system that advanced cartridges automatically, and these revolutionary self-contained cartridges called rocket balls that had the bullet, powder, and primer all in one neat little package. You just worked that lever, click, click, and bullets kept coming out like you were operating some kind of mechanical death machine. No fumbling with loose gunpowder that could spill everywhere. No desperate ramming of bullets down the barrel while someone's shooting back at you. No dealing with percussion caps that could fall off at the worst possible moment. The rocket ball cartridges were genius in their simplicity. Each one was basically a hollow base bullet with gunpowder packed into the cavity and a small primer charge in the base. Except there was one tiny little problem that completely ruined everything. The bullets hit about as hard as angry wasps. The rocket ball cartridges were so underpowered that contemporary reports describe men taking multiple hits and continuing to fight effectively. You could literally empty all 30 rounds into a determined attacker, and they'd still be standing there, probably just really annoyed and maybe bleeding a little. And while Americans were obsessing over rapid fire, the military was quietly developing something way more sinister: the pneumatic nightmare. Picture a cannon that fires dynamite bombs, makes almost no noise, and leaves no smoke trail to give away your position. It's 1883, and the Indian Wars are dragging on way longer than anyone in Washington expected. Military commanders are getting increasingly frustrated with conventional artillery that announces your position to everyone within 50 miles every time you fire a shot. The Apache, Sioux, and other tribes have gotten really good at spotting muzzle flashes and smoke clouds, then either attacking the gun positions or simply melting away before the shells even land. So this lieutenant named Edmund Louis Gray Zelinsky starts tinkering with compressed air instead of gunpowder, working out of Fort Hamilton in New York under conditions of absolute secrecy. The Zelinsky pneumatic dynamite gun was pure steampunk terror made real. Instead of gunpowder explosions, it used compressed air stored in massive tanks to launch 15-pound dynamite shells over distances exceeding 1 mile. The system was almost completely silent, just this soft whump sound as compressed air expelled the projectile, then complete destruction a mile downrange when that dynamite shell detonated. No muzzle flash to give away your position, no smoke cloud hanging in the air, no thunderous boom to alert every enemy within hearing distance. When those shells hit their targets, they didn't just damage buildings or fortifications, they erased them completely. The blast radius was over 100 yards, and anything caught in that zone just disappeared. Adobe buildings turned to dust, rock formations crumbled into rubble, and organic targets were scattered across the landscape in pieces too small to identify. But weapons this devastatingly effective come with psychological costs that nobody anticipated. Gun crews started having nervous breakdowns after just a few firing sessions. Some soldiers deserted rather than continue operating the system. Others requested transfers to combat units where they'd faced normal dangers, instead of being responsible for such complete annihilation. The compressed air system required constant maintenance by trained engineers who understood pressure vessels and pneumatic systems, knowledge that was extremely rare on the frontier. From American military secrets, let's jump back to civilian violence with a weapon that was basically a handheld massacre: the room clearer. Ever wonder what would happen if someone took a double-barrel shotgun and said, you know what, let's make this way more portable and way more destructive? The 1860s were absolutely brutal, especially in frontier saloons and gambling halls, where disagreements got settled with lead instead of lawyers. Regular pistols were fine for formal duels between gentlemen, but when you needed to clear an entire room full of troublemakers, drunk cowboys, or claimed jumpers, you needed something with a much wider spread pattern. Saloon owners, sheriffs, and anyone who dealt with crowds of potentially violent people were constantly looking for weapons that could end group confrontations quickly and decisively. The problem was that full-size shotguns were too big and obvious to carry concealed, but regular pistols required precision shooting that was nearly impossible in chaotic close-quarters situations with multiple threats, moving around in poor lighting. Enter the sawed-off shotgun pistol, basically a 12-gauge double barrel, cut down to about 18 inches total length, with the stock either removed entirely or cut down to a pistol grip. When you pulled that trigger, you weren't aiming at one specific person, you were essentially painting the entire wall behind them with buckshot. The spread pattern at typical saloon distances could easily take out multiple targets with a single shot, or guarantee that even if you missed your primary target, you'd hit something important nearby. But physics is a harsh and unforgiving teacher when it comes to firearms design. The recoil from firing a 12-gauge shell through an 18-inch gun could literally break your wrist if you weren't properly braced and ready for it. And after firing both barrels, assuming you survived the recoil without injury, your shooting hand was basically useless for the rest of any confrontation. The bones in your hand would be vibrating, your grip strength would be gone, and your accuracy with any follow-up weapon would be compromised for several minutes. Plus, the short barrel meant that anything beyond 10 feet turned into pure chance. You might hit your intended target, or you might accidentally redecorate the saloon and hit innocent bystanders instead. The weapon was also incredibly loud in enclosed spaces, often causing temporary or permanent hearing damage to everyone in the room, including the shooter. Speaking of multiple barrels, the next weapon took that concept and cranked it up to absolutely ridiculous levels. Tuiabai, the hand-cranked apocalypse. Imagine a weapon that could fire 200 rounds per minute, operated by hand crank, and could mow down an entire cavalry charge before the horses got within 100 yards. Dr. Richard Jordan Gatling was sitting in his Connecticut workshop in 1860s, reading casualty reports from early Civil War battles, and he had this weird, almost philosophical idea. What if one super effective weapon could kill so many people so efficiently that wars would just end immediately because nobody would want to face it? Sounds completely insane, but that was his actual reasoning. He genuinely believed that making warfare more deadly would make it so terrible that nations would stop fighting altogether. The timing was perfect for this kind of innovation because the Industrial Revolution was providing new manufacturing techniques that made complex mechanical systems actually feasible for mass production. Meanwhile, the Civil War was demonstrating that traditional military tactics were completely inadequate against modern weapons technology. The Gatling gun was mechanical death, perfected through precision engineering. 6 rifle barrels rotating around a central axis, each one loading, firing, and ejecting in perfect sequence as the operator turned a hand crank. As long as someone kept turning that crank and ammunition kept feeding into the system, the bullets literally never stopped coming. The psychological impact was just as important as the physical destruction. The continuous machine-like sound of rapid fire was unlike anything anyone had ever heard on a battlefield before. But this mechanical marvel had very human limitations that became apparent as soon as people tried to use it in actual combat conditions. You needed a crew of 4 trained people, 1 to aim and direct fire, 1 to operate the hand crank at consistent speed, and 2 more to feed ammunition belts and clear the inevitable jams that occurred when cartridges misfired or got stuck in the mechanism. If any crew member was killed or wounded, the entire system collapsed and became useless. The gun and its wheeled carriage weighed almost 200 pounds when assembled. So forget about rapid deployment or moving it during battle. Once you set it up, that's where it stayed until the fighting was over. But even the Gatling gun had to be reloaded eventually. Our next weapon tried to solve that problem in the most uniquely American way possible. The magazine monster. What if someone looked at a normal revolver and thought, you know what this needs? About 20 more bullets and a feeding mechanism that looks like a musical instrument? The 1850s were absolutely the golden age of weird firearms experiments, when every inventor and gunsmith in America was trying to solve the fundamental reloading problem that plagued frontier warfare. Everyone knew that the side with faster, more reliable firepower would dominate, but nobody had figured out the optimal solution yet. This was the era when mechanical ingenuity was considered the answer to every problem, and firearms designers were willing to try absolutely anything that might give them an edge. Jonathan Browning, father of the legendary John Moses Browning, who would later revolutionize firearms design, was working out of his Utah workshop, trying to create a repeating weapon that could give Mormon settlers a decisive advantage against potential threats from hostile tribes, federal troops, or just regular frontier criminals. The Mormon community was particularly interested in advanced weapons technology because they were essentially surrounded by potential enemies and needed every technological advantage they could get. The harmonica gun was named for its distinctive sliding magazine that looked exactly like a giant harmonica, a rectangular block with multiple chambers arranged in a row. You'd manually slide this magazine laterally after each shot, advancing to the next loaded chamber like changing notes on a musical instrument. Some versions held up to 25 rounds, which was absolutely revolutionary for the time period. It was like having a repeating rifle condensed into pistol form, giving individual shooters the firepower of a small squad. The mechanism was surprisingly sophisticated for its era. The sliding magazine had to align perfectly with the barrel for each shot, and a spring-loaded detent system held it in position during firing. When it worked properly, you could maintain a much higher rate of fire than any conventional single-shot or even multi-barrel weapon, and reloading the entire magazine could be done relatively quickly by someone with practice. From mechanical complexity, let's dive into pure psychological warfare with our next weapon. Ainda toward Furki Mahak, SC Starbasaki Urasaf Distoyadi, the Terror Tool. This weapon was designed with one specific goal in mind: make your enemies so absolutely terrified that they'd surrender without firing a single shot. The 1870s frontier was all about reputation, intimidation, and psychological dominance. Everyone understood that sometimes the threat of violence was far more effective than actual violence, and smart gunsmiths started designing weapons specifically to look as terrifying and overwhelming as possible. This was the era when frontier towns were becoming more civilized, but were still rough enough that a reputation for being heavily armed could prevent a lot of problems before they started. Wealthy ranchers, prominent businessmen, and anyone who had to deal with potentially hostile crowds were particularly interested in weapons that could end confrontations through pure intimidation rather than actual shooting. The goal was to create something so visually intimidating that rational people would choose to back down rather than find out what it could actually do in a fight. Multi-barrel pistols with 4, 6, or even 8 barrels arranged in various configurations, sometimes in a fan pattern, sometimes stacked vertically, sometimes arranged in a circle around a central axis. These weren't just about raw firepower, though they certainly offered that. They were specifically designed for maximum psychological impact, because when someone pointed one of these contraptions at you, your brain had to process not just one potentially lethal barrel, but a whole cluster of death tubes all aimed directly at your chest. The visual impact alone could end confrontations before they started, because most people's survival instincts would kick in when faced with such overwhelming potential firepower. But intimidation weapons came with their own set of serious problems that became apparent as soon as anyone tried to actually use them in real situations. All those barrels made the guns extremely heavy and unwieldy. Some models weighed over 4 pounds loaded, making quick-draw situations virtually impossible. The complex firing mechanisms were prone to malfunction, with multiple triggers, firing pins, and ignition systems that all had to work perfectly for the weapon to function as designed. If one barrel misfired, it could affect the timing and reliability of the others, potentially leaving you with a very expensive club instead of a functional firearm. And for our final weapon, let's talk about something that was so far ahead of its time. It almost seems like science fiction. The pocket cannon. Imagine a pistol so small you could hide it in your shoe, but so powerful it could drop a grown man with one perfectly placed shot. By the 1870s, concealed carry was becoming a real concern in increasingly civilized frontier areas where open display of weapons was becoming socially unacceptable, but personal protection was still absolutely necessary. People wanted reliable protection, but they also wanted to blend into polite society without advertising the fact that they were armed and potentially dangerous. The challenge was creating something small enough to hide completely, but effective enough to actually save your life when things went bad. This was particularly important for professional gamblers, traveling salesmen, and women of all social classes who needed protection but couldn't afford to look threatening or uncivilized. The Deringer pistol solved this problem with brutal mechanical efficiency. At just over 300 grams and measuring barely 4 inches total length, it packed serious stopping power into a package smaller than most modern smartphones. 2 barrels firing 40 caliber rounds and enough punch to end any close-range confrontation definitively with proper shot placement. These became the absolute favorite of poker players who needed something they could palm and fire without anyone seeing it coming. High society women who carried them in purses or sewn into dress pockets, and anyone who needed discreet protection that wouldn't be detected by casual observation. The 40 caliber round was specifically chosen for its stopping power, large enough to cause immediate incapacitation, but not so powerful that it would over-penetrate and hit innocent bystanders in crowded areas like saloons or hotels. But pocket cannons came with pocket-sized problems that could get you killed if you weren't aware of their limitations. 2 shots and you were completely done. No reloading under pressure, no second chances if you missed with both barrels. The extremely short barrel length made accuracy beyond 10 feet a matter of pure luck rather than skill, meaning you basically had to be close enough to touch your target to guarantee a hit. And that 40 caliber round created serious recoil in such a light gun, making follow-up shots extremely difficult, even if you could reload quickly enough for them to matter. These weren't just weapons, they were warnings. Some vanished into military archives, others exploded, jammed, or terrified their own users. But every single one proved that the Wild West wasn't just lawless, it was limitless in its pursuit of deadlier, stranger, more unpredictable ways to win a fight. Now we want to know what you think. Which of these weapons would you want at your side? And which one should have never left the workshop? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more untold stories like this, hit like, subscribe, and ride with us into the next chapter. The frontier was only the beginning.